Hey, welcome back to No Doubt Me. It's Papi Steve, Mr. Russell. And where we left off last, we kind of had episodes 4 and 5. 5 was kind of a departure talking about Douglas Adams. Have a little bit of fun. So really the last serious episode was episode 4 when we were talking about world history. And with that, I think we wrapped up with Adam Smith cautioning us against employments, the activities that people do when they do their employments. So that was kind of a good stopping point for kind of one school of thought, and that's just kind of like the historical Adam Smith view of maybe a little bit of what's wrong with this world. The next perspective I'd like to bring to the table is something I've dubbed organogenesis. I don't know if that's really a thing, but for me, it's where I've been stuck most of my life, and I'm sure many people have been struggled with those early phases of starting a business. When you're starting the genesis of your organization, and sometimes I'm sure it's self-evident how that's going to work out, but I'm sure in a lot of places it's not, such as myself. So for organogenesis, my idea is to apply some of the principles of morality to the different and early stages of a business development and go, hey, are some of these a little bit more compatible or not? So if you look at this kind of like a math proof that we're looking at, if you have a company with 0 peoples, I guess that's the null case. So we don't really have much to talk about there. All right, so if you have a company with 1 person, organogenesis, now there are some decisions that 1 person can make about their own career. I mean, if you consider yourself by default in the United States, you'd be in a sole proprietor. You've got your social security number, and you go out there and embark on a business using that. That's one way to go, and that's independent contracting. If you're going to work for somebody else, and if you're not going to work for somebody else, then you're just a sole proprietor doing your own thing, offering your own products and services. I guess if you're doing the services, maybe you're the independent contractor, but if you're doing the products, you're just selling products. So, and I'm trying to think of the difference between if you're like a consultant offering services, or if you have a convenience store that you own, and you're mainly selling products. So. Those are kind of like the early stages of 1 person business and organogenesis. I don't see, if I apply to me the question to the other people in my organization, which I have none yet, I've just got 1 person. But the idea is I want to be able to apply that do unto others, do unto you kind of mentality as we start adding numbers. So let's say we go from 1 person and we're now going to look at the 2nd person of the company. Well, is that 2nd person of the company, are they going to be an employee and I'm going to be a sole proprietor? When I just kind of heard what at least Adam Smith kind of thinks about me doing that. Or am I going to make him a partner in my newfound business? And I know most of America would be like, well, it's my idea, so if I'm going to start this business, and I'm going to hire employees to be my subordinates. The only problem I have with that is when I think of the relationship between a person and their first employee, the golden rule requires me to impose our positions briefly and ask the question, would I want to be an employee of this person, or would I rather be their partner? And I think, if I was being approached about business idea, just kind of, blank canvas, I'm thinking about this business, do you want to join me? If they were to say, you want to be my partner, and I didn't have anything going on, the premise here is that all things being equal, if someone asked me whether I'd rather be their partner or their employee, I like to think that I would say I would rather be your partner. I guess there's a logic where people will argue, someone doesn't want the overhead of being a co-owner. They just want a job that they're going to show up for and do this job. Or say, well, yeah, that's the way the world works now. But I'm not talking about the way the world works now. I'm talking about a kind of a better world, maybe. And the idea being one where I feel like if I ask myself the question, do others do it as you'd have them do unto you, then my thinking is I'd rather them ask me to be their partner than their employee. And that's really, for Organogenesis, that was my first step. So I'm like, okay, then for me, this sounds kind of crazy, but when people generally think of employer-employee, that kind of relationship, that kind of ruins it for me, the moral company thing. Sorry, but I'm like, nope, don't need that. I mean, okay, this is kind of a funny thing, is that for whatever reason, I reverted to my childhood when I was in the OSU marching band after I graduated from high school, Oklahoma State University. And one of my little things I would go around saying, and for those of you that were in band back then, back in '83, hey, how's it going? One of my favorite phrases to crack people up was, "You're not the boss of me." And I remember saying it when I was a young child. And so I'm 62 years old now, and I kind of like that phrase. You're not the boss of me. So it's kind of stuck with me my whole life, and I'm still saying it now. And I say it humorously because it's something a little kid says, but I like the sentiment there of you're not the boss of me. And I don't know that someone can really, ethically and morally be the boss of you. And that's a pretty big statement, I understand, for, episode 6. But I guess we can't rule out corporations because corporations can have all sorts of structures, right? And most of them look like, hierarchical pyramid type structures, but a corporation can. I know of an organization in Edmond, I believe, for a while, Edmond, Oklahoma, that was a flat organizational structure. It was kind of a grid of, here's all the names and here's all the jobs and who's doing the different jobs. And it was, I'm assuming that there was an owner, and I know you'll have to have an administrative tie-breaking processes and some form of governance and coordination, but it's interesting to think about the idea that when you're starting an organization, going out and getting your first employee is maybe a bigger decision than most people think. And I'm now more inclined to think that you'd be better off getting partners than you would trying to go out and getting employees. And that type of thinking started me down a path of trying to understand better the pros and cons of corporations and the pros and cons of their ethics and their morality. And, I needed some tools to understand a little bit better. So I went on an adventure, more adventures. This wasn't just the world history adventure. But I went on some adventures into network theory and to graph theory and to systems change theory. And I even dug a little bit back into a really interesting work. It turns out 200 years after Adam Smith published Wealth of Nations, there was a paper published by, I want to say, I'll double check their names because I'll probably talk about them again, but I want to say Jensen and Meckling? Internet, check it. It's a pretty dry document, but it's interesting that it's kind of unique in that it's kind of a standalone work. It's called Theory of a Firm. And it basically, in 1976, someone finally got around to going, here's what makes this whole thing work. And I think we should probably talk a little bit more about Theory of the Firm, because Theory of a Firm fills in a few more blanks into my feelings of, organogenesis. And I have some maybe not so kind things to say about the formation of companies as it's described in Theory of a Firm. But that's the path that we're going down now. So before we go there, though, I can say that, we just looked at the 0 case, null, and 1. We're not really interested in those when we're starting a company with 0 or 1 person. We don't have any issues. But we come in to start adding that second person, and we start going, are they going to be a partner or an employee? And that doesn't have to be the only case. We won't spend a lot of time on it now, but there's a multitude of other organizational structures and types of organizations, and we're talking a boatload about morality. So I'm not saying religion as an organization type is out of the question. We haven't really discussed a deity, but I think the morality thing has, something to go for it. From my understanding, it probably has more going for it maybe than, I don't know if everybody would say this, but maybe more than Scientology has going for it. This kind of moralistic view of things and of the world. Okay, so religion's possibility. We've got your co-op. Love the co-op, my friends. Grew up in Oklahoma. We've got, Yukon's best flour mill and grain elevators in my hometown. The castles of the prairie. I'm sure it's probably a cuter way somebody has said that. Palaces of the prairie, maybe, or something. But Oklahoma's got a lot of grain elevators, and love the idea of the co-ops. Co-ops is a part of the bread and butter of America, and the idea of it's very, got a lot of socialism vibes to it. And, for whatever people might think of socialism, we got to kind of remember that Oklahoma statehood, dominant party in Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl, pre-Dust Bowl days. That's right, Socialist Party. So socialism was popular in the early America. So, and considering, Democrats and Republicans nowadays, I can see why socialism might have some arguments for it. Not too surprisingly, I think by the time we get to the far end of this discussion and what's wrong with this world, you're going to probably find me closer to libertarianism. But, even from libertarianist standpoint, the biggest issue I have with that really is just that it's a faction. A faction, factions. Oh, sorry. We call them parties nowadays, but back in the day when they were starting, they were called factions. Back in the old days of, Paul Revere-ish type of days, Ben Franklin days, factions. That's what they were called. All right, so before we go down and talk about factions, though, that's going to be ways in the future. Let's focus a little bit next, I think, about theory of the firm. And something I've not too politely kind of referred to as what's kind of a stoogification process. And I will say that I feel pretty comfortably that now that we've gone a little bit over this idea of applying the golden rule to different types of organizational structures, and I think the idea of looking ahead a little bit, using organogenesis and turning the corner into looking towards the theory of the firm, I'm thinking I'm starting to dial. Now what we're starting to do is we're starting to talk about bits and pieces and parts. And, this is now we're getting to kind of classification theory, and that's, if you anthropomorphize something in classification theory, it's what do you know and what do you do? And that might sound bizarre, but that's kind of a software engineering concept. It helps people think about the software components of building. Anyway, a lot of object-oriented developers wouldn't know that's the foundations of object-oriented development. But try to type those different types of intelligences you have in your body. And classification theory is a big part of it. So we'll talk about the firm and the theory of the firm. And I'll just go ahead and say ahead of time, those of you that got excited when he said, he's going into theory of the firm, we'll talk about principal agent, the principal agency problem. Yeah, we can talk about principal agency problem, and we can talk even a little bit about, the math that's sent forth in theory of a firm, because there's some lovely math that helps justify the existence of those firms. But, there's a lot simpler math of morality that isn't really covered in theory of a firm. So let's buckle up and get ready to get into theory of a firm, because I'm pretty sure that by the time we get through theory of a firm, we're going to start getting a lot clearer picture of what's wrong with this world. Come on back.